Yeah, so there's a few things that we need to discuss with this application. The first being that the sign standards table is somewhat confusing with the wording. So I put it up here, and I think I addressed it a little bit in my staff report, but I do think it might be something that the board wants to discuss prior to hearing the application. That way we can make a decision. The board can make a decision on whether they agree with my interpretation or not. And I think if you do agree with my interpretation, Henry and I were talking, and we feel it might be appropriate that you kind of make a motion on that, and we send it over to Planning Commission to potentially update the sign standards table. But the way it reads now is 96 square feet or 10% of facade, whichever is greater. Since 2020, when the zoning ordinance was approved, we have not approved a wall sign above 10% of the facade. It has always been our interpretation that you can go up to 10% of the facade, and if you're at 10% of the facade and you're also at 96 square feet, you're capped at that 96 square feet. That's how the planning staff has interpreted it since the zoning ordinance was approved in 2020. Clearly, the wording on that is not great. It might lead you to read it that you can go up to 96 square feet, or you can go up to 10% of the facade. You know, for instance, in this application that we're going to hear later, they're proposing 42 square feet. If they went up to 96 square feet, they'd be at about 30% of the facade. The previous zoning ordinance, it only allowed for 5% of the facade. So you can kind of see the variation with that if we read it to be that you're allowed to go up to 96 square feet with no limitation on the percentage of the facade. So that's my interpretation would be that, you know, this application and any application that comes in, we would be looking at 10% of the facade. And if it was a, you know, very large building, we would say they would be capped at 96 square feet. If the board agrees, we can make that motion and have ask Planning Commission to start looking at a potential zoning ordinance text amendment. If you disagree, that's completely fine, and then there would be no need to hear this variance. We would say that they're in compliance with the ordinance as is. Is there any questions for me? Sorry, I know that's a lot to throw at you, but.
Yeah, I got confused.
Okay, yeah. What?
So what if the building surface was 900? So 10% of that would be 90. The way this reads, the applicant could have 96.
Yes, I would agree. The way it reads, yeah.
So what's the change?
Yeah, I'll let Henry.
Okay, let's take one. If you had a building facade that was 300 square feet, then you could still have 96 square feet of signage, and therein lies the problem. And so what we're talking about is up to 10% of the facade and never more than 96 square feet.
That's the grammar that I was lost.
Yeah.
Instead of greater than, say, and never more than.
Right.
Yeah, it can be that, or I think whichever is less might clear it up as well.
No more than.
Yeah, yeah.
So, 42 square foot, they're still within the 96, right?
Yes,
So their application is in compliance with the way it's written?
yes. If you don't interpret it the way that I interpret it, then yes.
I see that they can go up to 96. Obviously, from the picture, they probably would have a problem getting up there.
Yeah, I think it would take up more of their facade. They would be going over their windows and whatnot, but, so, yeah, like I said, I think it's important that the board makes a decision on this interpretation first. If you don't feel that the variance is necessary, you know, based on the way the zoning ordinance is written, that's completely fine. I'm just telling you where we're coming from as a staff, that the way that it's been interpreted and basically administered since 2020 is that we haven't issued a sign permit over the 10%. So that's really how we've interpreted and administered it since the new zoning ordinance.
I guess I kind of feel like that this case would be resolved before we talk about changing the wording, would be my thought.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have the authority to change the wording today. Planning Commission would have to initiate it, make a recommendation, and it would have to go to each of the legislative bodies to get approved. So they have the ultimate authority, so it wouldn't impact this application. If you disagree with the interpretation and you feel, the zoning ordinance is, I would say it's somewhat clear in the fact that it seems like you can go up to 96 square feet. So if you say, you know what, that's how we need to view it for now, and this variance isn't necessary, but we should look at changing it if you want to see it administered kind of the way we've interpreted it moving forward.
I guess to change it, I would want to look at some different, what exactly is 96 square feet? That's what, 12 by 12?
Yeah.
Better than that.
Yeah.
You weren't supposed to say that. So I
4 by 24.
So my thought would be, let's go on and make a decision, this particular instance, and then discuss. Is that okay?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
discuss whether it's worded correctly or incorrect.
Yep.
Based on the wording as it stands, I think that you should approve the request or say it's not even necessary to make the variance. I'm almost of the opinion that it's better off to just say they don't need it based on total maximum as it's written right now.
And is this, can we alter the way we normally do things? They don't have to speak, do they?
You can alter the way that you normally do things. There,
I just want to ask a question. The picture we have, I guess the sign is Silver Soul Clothing.
Yeah, it's just going right back in. There's actually a sign underneath that picture right there that's there now that we have covered. We'll uncover it, then we have to make the faces, which actually clip into that sign band. So really, there's no way, we would have to find a way to, I don't know if we could make it smaller. Because removing those panels from the existing sign, we'd have to finagle it to where it'll clip right back into that, so there's no gaps or holes or anything to leak inside the building.
Is this storefront the same width as the salon next door?
It's,
No, it's actually a little bit smaller. So every sign in Danville Manor is,
Yeah.
they're all different sizes. None of them are the same. So Magic Vapor is actually the same size, tenant panel space as Silver Soul Clothing. Same exact size and everything, but their storefront's larger, so that's why it got approved. The storefront for Silver Soul is smaller, so that's why it's in question.
yeah. The building is a bit odd. They did do that black strip along the entirety of Danville Manor, essentially. I think the Planet Fitness redid their facade or whatnot, and I think one of the other big buildings, but the majority of it has that black band, and so you can kind of see how some of the signs did it. The wording on the ordinance is a little bit weird because it's beyond the 96 square feet. It says that if the background is a different color than the wall color, that we have to include it in our calculation. So when we're looking at that Silver Soul Clothing, you kind of have to look at the entirety of this band here because it wouldn't match the wall color, even though it's kind of built into the building as well.
Mr. Sutherland and Mr. Chair, I hear the direction that you all are leaning on this. I would say that one reason to hear this as a variance application would be to preserve the current interpretation of this. And, maybe we're not concerned about 96-foot signs getting slapped up in inappropriate places. But if we proceed today as a variance, then we preserve the existing interpretation until such time as we can amend the zoning ordinance. And I think we've heard grounds now from the applicant for granting a variance because of the structure of what they're going to have to put up there.
I'll go get them.
Okay, so we will, proceed from the steps.
That makes sense.
Can we hear from the applicant, please?
Sorry, it's gonna take me a second.
You're fine. And please state your name and address and swear that your testimony today is truthful and accurate to the best of your knowledge.
I need my name and address.
Just your names.
Okay. I'm Cassie Barker with USA Signs, and everything I say today is true and not misleading.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you have already heard a majority of it. So the sign that we're proposing is just 5-ish, maybe a little over square feet, larger than what they're allowing at the present moment. But the way the sign is built, it is routed aluminum, painted, bent, and then has a white backer plex panel basically bolted onto the back of it, plus LED lighting. If we were to go any smaller than the existing sign that's there, it has a possibility of leaks into the building, which would cost the landlord a lot of money to fix. And there's not really a way to make it smaller. If we did, it would be even more pieces of metal there than is necessary to even put that sign. That takes 2, but if we had to piece it together, it could take 3 or more, depending on how many small pieces we needed.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Is there anyone here to speak in opposition to the request? Hearing none. We'll close the public portion of the hearing and begin the deliberation portion. Is there any further discussion or deliberation from the board? Lonnie, you want us to bring you up to speed?
I make a motion we approve the request for sign variance. Not seeing that it has any negative impact on public welfare. Go ahead, Henry.
No negative impacts. What is proposed is a small adjustment without opposition. And furthermore, I think this is the crucial one, to reduce the size of a replacement panel would incur additional cost and pose a risk to the building in the form of leaks.
Okay, there's a motion, is there a second? Second by Mr. Light, discussion. All in favor? It's unanimous, there's no opposition. So the request is granted. Our next order is old business. I don't think there is any. Do we need to discuss if we want to recommend changing the wording of the ordinance?
Yes.
Let's do that as new business. No old business, new business. Let's discuss changing the wording.
Okay.
What do y'all think?
It's definitely, the wording should be instead of whichever is greater, whichever is smaller. The smaller of the two, right?
Mhm.
Instead of the larger of the two.
Yes. Yes. I think that's what we discussed having them do.
This, I think it's helpful sometimes to have this interaction between the two planning boards. They don't get a chance to enforce these kinds of, granular details, and you have experience with it. So this just kind of pushes it through. It's a useful nudge from you guys to the planning commission. And so a motion for a resolution to change the language would be the appropriate motion. Yes, yes, sir.
What,
A resolution to amend the sign table to state 10% of the facade or the lesser of 10% of the facade or 96 square feet.
And that should go across the board on all different, possible.
Yes, it shouldn't just be for the highway business. I think it should be for each of the the zoning districts within the sign standards table.
But if it's whichever is smaller, say it's like a factory building, what if the building was 40 by 100? You know, which,
is
the bigger
imaginable?
industrial building might be that big, so that's 4,000 square feet. So 10% would be 400. And how big would, just in perspective, how big would 96 square feet be on 4,000 square foot?
I'm thinking back to the distillery there on the bypass. I believe we granted, did we not grant them a variance to allow them to exceed the 10%?
We did, for the painting that they did on the one side.
So it wouldn't
For
look
the
like a
bypass.
postage stamp.
But from my memory, this whole point came about with, I think it was Daniel, when they were doing a lot of remodeling. They built an office on not too long ago. And when that signage came about, of course, you're talking a huge factory
Yeah.
building,
Your
and their
point.
signage that was facing the bypass, they wanted it to be large, but you just can't go too massively large,
But
so.
I mean, it's more than 10%,
Oh,
and it's more than 96 square feet. And appropriately, it's larger than 10% or 96 square feet.
right. But that was what brought all this about in Steve's
So I
mind.
don't think that works.
Yeah, the wording makes sense. Yeah. I agree.
And then on a case-by-case basis, we would hear exceptions.
Exactly, and somewhere like Denyo or the distillery, it's appropriate. I mean, it's on the bypass, there's
And
not
it's 300
costly.
yards off the road.
Yeah.
Right, they needed it to be larger to be seen.
Depend on what's holding it up too, right?
We're more than likely to see a smaller, building than we are though to see
Yeah,
a big
but
place in the bypass.
like, I believe like Preston said, it's almost a situational and a conditional. So maybe that's where it comes in to come before us for variance. But what's the reasoning? Can the reasoning be because it seems appropriate or, you know?
To put the 96 square foot cap on it or to change the
to
wording?
exceed, like on Denyo or a building
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah, I mean,
that. And you just say it just seems appropriate that it is that big.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It would have to
Yeah,
be
I
on a
guess you're not
case-by-case basis.
Well,
Not
that-
a hardship or a necessity.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
actual cap, I don't think was there. It wasn't in place at the time Denyo did their signage.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, was Steve's reason for doing the 96 was to keep
Yeah.
from a lot of that
Yeah.
occurring.
But
on
I mean-
guess my point is 10% seems appropriate.
In that case, yes.
Yeah,
Better
I
than
mean,
10%, probably.
you could also look at just recommending to remove the cap of 96 square feet. We didn't have a cap on it before. We just had it at 5%, so we did already up it to 10%. It sounds like it came about for a specific purpose, so I don't know if that will gain traction or not, but it's your motion to make, so.
I think a bare minimum of action could just be kind of in the way that Congress works to suggest that there be a report or looking into it. Just a suggestion of action would be sufficient if you don't feel comfortable proposing.
Just ask for them to review it.
Henry, did you just make a motion?
We need to do that in the form of
Can't.
a motion.
Please. and weigh the removal of maximum caps.
No, it's not, we're not removing the maximum cap.
We're removing the square footage
The
requirement.
96, we're, right, because 10% of a big building still is 10% of a big building. Still would be a 400 square foot sign.
It would be asking them to look at removing the square footage requirements.
The 96.
Or-
And maybe.
Or maybe the 10%, or the wordage, just, I think that it's incumbent upon us to ask them to review it and come back with some recommendations. Maybe they say, you know, we'll get rid of the whichever is greater,
Or the lesser, or,
the 96%, which would obviously get rid of the whichever is greater. So,
That's a tough one.
yeah, I think they should just, my motion would be that they review it and maybe offer up some suggestions.
There's a motion, is there a second? Seconds. Monty seconds.
you beat me to it.
Any further discussion?
Spit second.
Any no further discussion? Motion second, all in favor?
Let's let you go. Missed that one too.
Yes.
And, it's unanimous, the hearing no opposition. Motion passes. Next order of new business is election of officers.
I nominate Mr. Coomer to serve as our chairperson.
Motion second. Any discussion? All in favor? All abstain. Motion carries.
Do you accept?
And we need a vice chair also,
Yes.
which is now Mr. Sutherland.
Second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
You got to be quick on your feet around here.
And that's it, correct, Lisa?
I totally missed that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I believe it was Miles and then Lay that made the motion for Mr. Coomer, and then Lay and then Miles made the second for Mr. Sutherland. Is that right? Okay,
Sounds right.
all right.
Is there any other new business?
I do not have any.
Anyone on the board have new business? Is there a motion to adjourn? Oh, yes, sir.
Henry, you come up with anything else on the training? Or anything,
In terms of providing a training opportunity?
or anything, yeah.
Okay, I'll have something I'll have a training opportunity that I could present in May.
Michaela's sitting out of training.
I guess I saw that.
Yeah.
Or next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday at 2 p.m. You can do it virtually.
Okay, I would look at my phone too much time.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it's the Bluegrass ad. They're doing a housing discussion with, it sounds like Lexington Planning, and then I forget, one other guest speaker as well. But we can also come up with in-house options if you're not able to make that work, and we can work with you on it, so.
I did notice that it's worth noting that if you want the time to count as training credits, your camera has to be on.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Gotta be dressed.
Okay.
Wait stuff anyway.